As with anything in life, you win some and you lose some, and the same goes for basketball. The same goes for the NBA draft. Sometimes you get lucky and you hit on somebody, and you get a Giannis Antetokounmpo at number 14, who ends up being the best player from the draft. But sometimes, just sometimes, you pull a Darko Milicic instead. I'm Jeff Blagden.
And I'm Xavier Barnett.
This is the Pure Point Project, where we are counting down our top 5 NBA draft busts of all time. I think, given the situation, we should start at number 5. I think we should count it down backwards for this one.
No, I totally agree.
So I don't know who you got at number 5. I'm gonna let you go first because my number 5 here, there's guys that had worse careers that could have gone on the list, but there's some other significance that goes into my number 5. So let's see what you got at number 5.
All right, so my number 5 is LaRue Martin from the Portland Trailblazers. Just to start of thing. This guy was drafted ahead of Julius Erving, Dr. J. He was drafted ahead of Bob McAdoo. It's insane now that you look at it, right? The Trailblazers going into it doesn't really hurt them too bad because they got a championship a couple of years later, but still, knowing what could have been, right? Could have been Dr. J's first championship with the Trailblazers, right? So, it's that's my number 5.
But the question is, would they have gotten Bill Walton if he ended up being good?
That is a good question.
It's always weird to look back on those things in NBA history where people are like, this person could have played with this person. It's like, could they really have, though? Because a lot changes when you put a better player on a team, right? They win more games, and all of a sudden,
they're not going to have that draft. But then they could have had someone that's considered a steal, right? So
true. My first player on the list, my number 5, is kind of a lot of the reason he's at number 5 is because I can't do a list of the top draft busts without putting a player from this team on the list. Like, they've just had so many draft busts. They keep getting rewarded with high picks, and they keep screwing them up time after time again. And at one point, it was just like, they get the number 1 pick, you know it's going to be a bust. You might as well, if you have the number 2 overall pick, be looking at the best guy on the board because they're not going to take him. It was like that for a large stretch for the Los Angeles Clippers, the Buffalo Clippers, the San Diego Clippers, whatever they were at the time that they did it. They would just keep drafting these guys that just... And a lot of times they were out of nowhere. This one wasn't necessarily out of nowhere, which is why I picked this one, because a lot of people would have gone with this guy at number 1 if they had the number 1 pick, but he just ended up being a bust. That was Michael Olowokandi, the Candy Man. He was supposed to be the next star big, the next big center in the league that would support the franchise for years to come. He was supposed to come in Olajuwon fashion, and take over the team. He had a lot of similarities to Olajuwon. He's from overseas. He's got the African sounding kind of name, right, with the Olowokandi, Olajuwon, right? And then, of course, yes, both start with Olo as well. Both 7-foot tall centers, both in very good athletic condition in that. It's just, Olowokandi couldn't put it together, His rookie season wasn't too terrible, averaged 9 points and 8 rebounds a game. Moved into his second season up to 10 points and 8 rebounds per game again, but then drops down to 8.5 and 6.4 and kind of stagnates and sits there throughout his career. Ends up for his career being an 8.3 point, 6.8 rebound per game kind of guy on about 26 minutes per game. Not terrible, but when you key in the fact that the guy was a 7-footer, all his shots were coming in, within 5-10 feet of the basket, and he shot 43% for his career.
Oh,
right?
That's
he was given the opportunities to have a team on his own. The Clippers did want him to be the focal point of that team. He could just never really pull it together and do it. So there have been worse picks. There have been bigger busts in NBA history for sure. But when you pile in the fact that the Clippers were so bad at drafting for so long, and then unlucky when they did hit on a guy like, say, Blake Griffin, where he gets hurt and misses his entire first season, right? I feel like they need to be represented on this list.
No, that's fair. Fair point. And speaking of injuries and guys getting hurt, that brings me to my 4th guy. which is, I know it's controversial, and he's a damn good player when he was playing, but I'm going to give it to Greg Oden. Another Trailblazers. I know it sounds like I'm picking on the Trailblazers, but I just want to picture this, right? It's Greg Oden. Yes, I do know at the time everyone would have picked someone over him, which is fair, but Kevin Durant is possibly, like you said, one of the best pure scorers the game has ever seen.
If not the best.
Yeah, right? If not the best. And the way that he just takes over a game is just insane, right? But they picked Greg Oden. So the Trailblazers could have had that. And who knows, they probably wouldn't have got Lillard or anything like that if they had Durant, but who knows what it could have been. They could have been another championship for the Blazers. Could have been a big what if for them. But who knows?
I think
we'll see.
Greg Oden kind of suffers a lot from the Sam Bowie effect. Again, another Blazer, but the Sam Bowie effect in that the guy who was drafted after him is one of the best players ever to play the game, right?
Yeah.
Like Sam Bowie was picked at number 2, and he was okay, had a decent NBA career. If he was drafted in 1987, I don't want to say that for sure because I don't have the year in front of me, and 87 might have been a blowout year. I don't know on the draft, but just a random year, right? If he was picked in 1998 instead of Olowokandi, it would have probably been an okay number 2 pick. It would have gone down in history as not the best, but he played a long time. He stuck around. He put up some numbers. He had one All-Star appearance, right? But the guy who was drafted immediately after him was Michael Jordan. Right?
Yeah.
The guy who was drafted immediately after him is the best player in NBA history. And I think Oden kind of suffers from that as well. If you go back in time to 2007, when we were thinking about this draft and that, everyone had Oden. Oden was number 1 on every single person's draft board. And a lot of it was because he was a freak athlete for a 7-footer. He was so skilled as a 7-footer. He was very good at defense. The guy was basically ambidextrous. He could shoot free throws with his left hand and his right hand, right? And it's rare enough to find a 7-foot center that can consistently hit free throws, period. So he was a big impact player. But yeah, the injuries kind of got in the way, and obviously the injuries are the big reason that he's even considered for something like this. I don't consider Greg Oden a draft bust at all, and I think it's because all of the reasons that he's a bust were entirely out of the hands of the organization. Right? Like a lot of guys, you look at a lot of the busts. I don't want to call it anyone specific because I don't want to spoil the list for later. But you look at a lot of the busts, and it's like these guys they didn't perform good. They were bad. They tried, and they never lived up to the expectations. But Oden is different in that he kind of was, when he could play, living up to the expectations, living up to the hype. Like he was a good player in the NBA, just couldn't stay healthy, right? And obviously it doesn't help that the very next person picked after him is a future MVP, a 2-time finals MVP, a future Hall of Famer, right?
Yeah. That's probably mostly why I weighed that list into it, right? Because that was... So, but yeah.
My number 4 is a little different. My number 4 is mostly number 4 because of the incredible... college career that this player had. A very, very good college career. One of the more famous endings to a college career in NBA history, but they ended up getting picked 3rd overall and playing the exact same number of years, 3, in the NBA after that. That was, of course, Adam Morrison, picked number 3 by Charlotte out of Gonzaga in 2006. You look at the guys that were picked after him, and I mean, this wasn't a great draft to begin with. The 2006 draft was not a great draft class. However, Adam Morrison averaged 7 points per game over the course of his career, and he was a scorer. Like, that's what he came out of college as, was a scorer. For his career, negative 1.4 win shares. That means for his 3-year career, he was worth a negative amount of wins to his team. He lost his team more games than he contributed to wins over the course of his career. So, shot 37% from the field, averaged 7.5 points per game, was out of the league in 3 years after having a spectacular career at Gonzaga. One that goes down in history of the upset, of course, the picture of him crying on the court after the game when they lost in the final minutes of that one when they were the number 1 seed. Maybe he never recovered from the college letdown. Maybe it was like the Super Bowl hangover, but he couldn't get over it. It was just stuck with him for his whole career because the writing was not on the wall for Adam Morrison being a bad NBA player, right? Like he was probably a little high at number 3, right? But I think a lot of people would have picked him in the top 10, right? And a lot of people would have thought he'd have like a Shane Battier-esque career, right? But he didn't. And that's so I got to take Adam Morrison there. Injuries had nothing to do with it. He just couldn't live up to the expectations that he'd built up through his college career. And then you look afterwards, guys at the same position, they could have gone with Tyrese Thomas, Brandon Roy. I mean, I know hindsight, he had his injury concerns too, but for the 6 years he played versus the 3 years Adam Morrison played, I'd take those any day. Rudy Gay, who's, just recently out of the league. Randy Foye even, right? So JJ Redick was there that was picked after him. So there's a lot of directions they could have went, and they got stuck with Adam Morrison. So, I mean, it just goes to pile onto the resume of Michael Jordan as the worst executive in the history of the NBA. But I digress. Number 3.
All right, and my number 3 is Kwame Brown. So this, sorry if I said his name wrong. Average in the career, this guy is a center, power forward. His frame was 6'11", 270 pounds, and he averaged 6.6 points per game. And that's this guy was one of the big number 1 picks. They wanted him good, but he just kind of had a career where I call it the mercenary NBA player, where they stay for a team for 4 years and then they just get shopped around all over the league. Kind of like your Rajon Rondo now, or Isaiah Thomas, 2 ex-Boston Boston players. So yeah, I don't have as much detail into it as my good friend Jeff here, but I'm sure that's what I'm gonna put as my number 3.
I remember when Washington picked Kwame Brown, and it's funny because Kwame Brown was one of those guys where he didn't have a fantastic college career, or sorry, high school career, I should say. He didn't, he like his film wasn't off the charts. But the dude was 6'10", 270 pounds coming out of high school as a 19-year-old, right? Or as an 18-year-old at the time, right? So it was a very do or die, like a very risk-heavy pick at the time even, right? Because there was a very real chance he never developed to become the player that his potential said he could become. And he really never did. And it's funny because one of the biggest downfalls of Kwame Brown's career, and it's going to sound weird, and a lot of people, I mean, it's been well documented before, but one of the biggest reasons people say his career was so bad is that he had really small hands, right? So he couldn't grab rebounds and hold on to them like a lot of big men could, right? They would knock the ball out of his hands because he just didn't have the grip on them that a lot of the big men in the NBA could, right? Like you watch, I always say you watch Jordan highlights when he goes to the rim, and the most amazing thing to me isn't the athletic plays that he makes. It's the fact that he holds onto the ball the whole time in one hand, palming it, sticking it out wide. Nobody knocks it out, all of that stuff. Kwame Brown could never do that. Kwame Brown's just his hands were too small for it, and yeah, he never lived up to that massive potential that he had. He was very Andrew Bynum-esque in that way. Both of them came out of high school, right? Both of them had this bright future ahead of them that were supposed to do great things because they were supposed to develop and become better based on their potential, and they never really did. And that's the risk you get when you pick a guy based off of potential, right? Sometimes it works out. Unfortunately,
sometimes it never does.
Yes, unfortunately, more frequently than it works out, it doesn't. But when you have a chance to get a guy that might revolutionize the league, right? You owe it to take that risk, right? You got to remember too, Washington at the time, like they were just getting out of a period, or not really getting out of a period, but they were just like they were a year before Michael Jordan had to come out of retirement to save them is when they drafted Kwame Brown. Let's put it that way, right? So this is a team that the fan base didn't have a lot to look forward to coming to a Wizards game, right? So bringing in a guy that had this massive potential and this draw and this athleticism like Kwame Brown probably looked like a good idea from a marketing perspective at the time, but never really worked out for them, and worked out even worse for Kwame Brown when he was supposed to be the guy that was supposed to take over for Shaq in L.A. Went to L.A. and, well, we all know how that ended up for him. So, yeah, he was kind of a bust twice in that way. But definitely deserving of the list. I debated whether I wanted to put him on my list or not. I didn't put him on there. A lot of that reason is because the three guys that I have that are coming up next along the list are, in terms of their statistical output, are just like embarrassingly bad. At number 3, I have a more recent pick than most of ours have been so far. Hasheem Thabeet, out of the University of Connecticut. He was drafted in 2009, the number 2 overall pick, played a total of 5 years in the NBA, was absolute hot steaming trash for every single one of them. Career averages of 2.2 points per game, 2.7 rebounds per game, and 10.5 minutes per game over the 224 games he played during his career. This is a guy who came out of college and was supposed to... He had a lot of the same kind of... he had a lot of comparisons to Greg Oden in that he was this big guy, really good at defense. 7'3", Hasheem Thabeet was, right? How do you pass up on a guy who's 7'3", really athletic, already knows how to play defense? You don't have to teach him how to play defense, right? He played for an incredible franchise like UConn, who are known for putting out NBA players that are great, especially big men, right? So to have Hasheem Thabeet come out and be the massive flop that he was, I think was surprising for everyone. I was surprised. I thought Hasheem Thabeet was going to be an all-star. You know, I thought Hasheem Thabeet's career was going to be basically what Brook Lopez's career had been up until the point that he started shooting threes all the time. But never materialized. Most he averaged in a single season for his career was 3.1 points and 3.6 rebounds. Those were both in his rookie year. After that, didn't play more than 10 minutes a game until 2013, in which he played 11 minutes per game in his second to last season in the league. Averaged 2.4 points per game and was out of the league the next year.
Wow. I'll see you later.
Yeah, that's one of the, for me, if the list was most shocking busts, I think that'd probably be, if not the top, it'd be competing for the top on my list, just because he was supposed to be so good. Like he looked like a can't miss prospect, you know, even if he didn't live up to expectations. Back to the thing I said about Sam Bowie, right? Whereas Sam Bowie was picked number 2 overall, wasn't fantastic, but was pretty good for a guy that was picked number 2 overall if it was any other draft class, right? Same with Hasheem Thabeet. That's what we thought he would be, right? He would be that guy that would be basically like Sam Bowie, where even if at his worst, right, he would still be a decent caliber player in the NBA, but he just blew everybody's mind and never became that, despite those, you know, really good college teams that he played on at UConn.
Yeah, that's just the thing, right? The NBA is just so hard to be good, and sometimes it's hard to gaze. Like someone that can just look so much like the sure thing and just flop so hard like that, right? So it's never an open and shut case, you know. Sometimes it's always who knows.
Based
who knows
on
what you can get.
Based on the players both of us have revealed so far, I have a feeling our number 1 and 2s are the same. But who you got at number 2?
My number 2 is Darko Milicic, right? So yeah, this guy, 2003 is considered one of the best, if not the best, draft of all time. And this guy went number 2 right after LeBron, who went number 1. And we all know who's from that draft. Well, We have Wade, we have Bosch, Carmelo Anthony, and this guy went before all of them. It's just insane to think about the potential that Detroit could have had at least one of those teams. Obviously, they've won before, after the next year, but still, they still would have been able to have like at least one piece to build for the future, right? So it's a little sad, but what can you do? Sometimes you just miss.
The problem with the Milicic draft, and that everyone that does these redrafts has, going back and looking at 2003, everyone's like, oh, they should have taken Carmelo Anthony. They should have taken Carmelo Anthony. They should have taken Carmelo Anthony. I don't think they win the championship the next year with Carmelo Anthony. I don't think he's the player that fits with that. Like, you look at that team, the core of that team that went to all those Eastern Conference championships, 5 in a row, that went to 2 NBA finals, won one, beat what was a heavily favored Lakers team that was supposed to be, one of the best teams in the history of the NBA. Gary Payton, Kobe Bryant, Shaq, Karl Malone, all on that team, right? Very, very, very good team, right? They were supposed to run away with it, and Detroit beats them in the finals behind the strength of their team approach with Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace. None of them are superstars, right? But they all supported each other so well, and I don't think if you throw Carmelo Anthony in there, they do the same thing or have the same amount of success. And at the time, the team they had, they needed a forward. They needed a big forward. They didn't have Rasheed Wallace yet. They traded for him away from Washington a little bit later, Washington was just, they had Chris Webber, Juwan Howard, and Rasheed Wallace. What were they even doing? But they send Rasheed Wallace over there and complete that team, but before he got there, all they really needed was a power forward, right? Darko Milicic was the best one on the board. Chris Bosh was up there too, but I don't think at the time a lot of people were arguing for Chris Bosh over Darko Milicic, right? So there's certain busts in NBA history where you look at it and you know they're going to be a bust, right? And then there's certain ones where you look at it and you go, yeah, that's not the best player on the board, but this team is in a win now mode and it's already the best player on the team, or the best player for the team, right? Like, the Pistons lucked into that number 2 pick, right? They were a good team that happened to have the number 2 overall pick, right? So they went with need, and unfortunately, the way it goes most times in the NBA, if you draft from need instead of the best player available, it ends up being a bust a lot more often than if you go with the best player. Always draft for potential, basically, is what I'm saying. Not even, because I just ragged on potential earlier. The draft is a crapshoot. That's what I'm saying. You're going to get what you get, and you have just throw a dart at a board and take whoever it lands on. But, yeah, my number 2 is also Darko Milicic. I'm a Pistons fan, so it's embarrassing to put it there, but I don't think it's as embarrassing as a lot of the other busts, just because the next year they won a championship. So really, they wouldn't have been better if they drafted Bosh. The best they could have been is the same, right? So maybe they win more championships, but I don't know. I still think during that stretch where they made 5 Eastern Conference finals, I think most of those years the Western Conference champion would have beat them in a series, right? And I don't think swapping Darko Milicic for Chris Bosh changes that. I don't think swapping him for Chris Kaman changes that. I don't think swapping him for Michael Petrus, Jarvis Hayes, or Carmelo Anthony changes that. So while yes, it's a bust, it still somehow ended up to work out for them.
Yeah. That's the positive.
And the grand reveal of our number 1 overall bust. I think we should probably just say it at the same time because everybody has it on the list. Like, I'll just count down from 3. 3, 2, 1. Anthony Bennett. Yeah. The thing about the Anthony Bennett pick is what I just said about sometimes there's a pick where you look at that pick and you just know that it's going to be a bust. Like, you just know that it's a bad pick. And that was that Anthony Bennett pick. Is that as soon as they made the pick, everyone was just kind of like, what? Everyone was like, who? Right? Like, I feel like the commissioner was standing up there and ready to go, At number 1, the Cleveland Cavaliers select Victor Oladipo, Anthony Bennett, right? Like, right? Because like everyone thought Oladipo was going to go number 1, everybody, right? And then just out of nowhere, Cleveland's like, now we're going to take Anthony Bennett out of UNLV, like the overweight, out of shape, doesn't really have an NBA position. Anthony Bennett out of UNLV, which hasn't been good since Duke beat them on the Christian Laettner shot in 1992. Like, it's such a weird pick. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, and I love the fact that he's from Canada, but because we're Canadian, hint hint. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what this pick is.
Yeah. It's an inexplicable pick. It doesn't make sense. Ended up playing 151 games total in the NBA throughout his career. 4 seasons in the league, then he was gone. 12 minutes per game, averaged 4.4 assists, 3.1 boards. Was worth half a win share for his career. It's just, you look at the guys that came after him, you have Victor Oladipo in there, CJ McCollum's in there. It wasn't a great draft. Like, let's be honest. There's probably no Hall of Famers in this draft aside from Giannis at 15, and there's no way they were going to take a dude out of Greece at number 1, right? Especially the Giannis at the time, who was, 6'10", 200 pounds maybe, right? Like, he was basically Kevin Durant, but he couldn't shoot, right? So, nobody was going to be taking Giannis at number 1. It just wasn't happening. It wasn't on anyone's list. So you can say that all you want, all those people out there that are like this, the redrafters or the theorists that would pick that. It just wasn't going to happen. There's no chance, right? But a guy like maybe Otto Porter plays the same position as Bennett, wouldn't have been a terrible pick there. The pick everyone thought it was going to be, Oladipo, would have been a fine pick there, right? He ended up making an all-star game afterwards, but Nerlens Noel, even, who ended up winning Rookie of the Year, or not Rookie of the Year, sorry. What's his face won Rookie of the Year? Michael Carter Williams won Rookie of the Year that year, but Nerlens Noel realistically should have. But it was a bad draft. It was, but it's just such a mind-boggling pick. Even still thinking back on it to this day, I'm at a loss for words, tongue-tied, even thinking. Like, I can remember my face when they announced Anthony Bennett, and it was just pure shock.
Yeah. Who? I don't. For me, this was just. I was like, wow, he's Canadian. Please be good. And I'm like, and also think I'm like, wow, Cleveland got another number 1 draft pick, 2 and 3 years, right?
And then they get one the next year and take Wiggins.
Yeah. Right. But then both these guys get traded for the Kevin Love trade.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it worked out for them, right? Like, it's the same thing we talked about with Darko Milicic. At the end of the day, it worked out for Detroit, right? At the end of the day, Anthony Bennett kind of worked out for Cleveland because, they got their only championship. They got LBJ back, and they got Kevin Love out of it, right? But at the time, man, that just a strange pick. But those are
head scratcher.
Exactly. Those are our top 5 draft busts. We'll let you go for now, but keep it locked right here to the Pure Point Project as we bring you more basketball content all throughout the week and, well, throughout this unfortunate quarantine time.
See you guys later.